The alarm bells rang through the human ship New Seoul as it drifted near the edge of known space. Captain Dongwoo sat in his command chair, watching the stars through the main window, when the communication system came alive with a sound he had never heard before. It was deep and strange, like the voice of something very old and very powerful, speaking across the darkness between worlds. Sujin looked up from her pilot controls with wide eyes. She had been flying ships for 10 years, but this signal was different from anything in the databases. The sound filled the bridge and seemed to make the metal walls vibrate. Taeho stopped working on his engineering console and turned to listen. Even Bora put down her communication headset to hear what was coming through the speakers. The voice spoke in a language that their translation computers had to work hard to understand. It took several minutes before the words became clear. When they did, the crew of New Seoul sat in silence because what they heard changed everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. People of all worlds hear this message. The Great Council of Vorthak Prime calls for champions from every species that flies between the stars. An ancient challenge has been awakened. The Arena of Terrors opens its gates for the first time in 1,000 years. Each race must send one champion to face the trials that wait inside. The winner will bring honor and 3 star systems to their people. Those who fail will see their species bow to those who succeed. Dongwoo felt his heart beat faster as the message continued. The voice described an arena built by beings so old that most species had forgotten they ever existed. Inside this arena lived creatures and machines designed to test the strongest warriors from across the galaxy. Some of these things had destroyed entire planets before being captured and brought to the arena. Others had been built by races that no longer existed, using technology that modern science could not explain. The message showed pictures that appeared in the air above their control panels. Dongwoo saw a massive structure that stretched across the surface of a world. It looked like someone had taken a city and twisted it into impossible shapes. Towers reached up toward space while deep pits dropped down into darkness. Metal paths connected floating islands that hung in the air without any support. In some places, the arena looked like it was alive with walls that moved and breathed. But the most frightening part of the message was what it showed about the other champions who would compete. The screen filled with images of warriors from species that humans had never seen before. There was a creature made of living crystal that stood 3 times taller than any human. Its body reflected light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The voice called it a Zephyrian battlemaster named Vexthul, who could cut through metal with its bare hands. Another image showed something that looked like a giant insect walking on 2 legs. It had 4 arms that ended in claws sharp enough to tear through ship armor. Its eyes were large and black and seemed to look right through the screen at the humans watching. This was Kliktar from the Mantari hive worlds. The voice said it could think 1,000 thoughts at once and move faster than most beings could see. More champions appeared on the screen. Gorth was a massive creature covered in thick plates of bone-like armor. He came from a world where everything was always at war and only the strongest survived. His species called themselves the Brutalians, and they had conquered 12 star systems through pure violence. Next to him stood Silex, who was not really solid at all, but looked like living energy held together in the shape of a person. The Photon Collective had made him from the core of a dying star and given him the power to control light itself. Each image was more frightening than the last. There were beings who could control minds with their thoughts, others who could change their shape to become anything they wanted. Some were so strong they could break mountains with their fists, while others were so fast they could be in 10 places at once. Every champion seemed to have powers that made them almost like gods compared to ordinary humans. Sujin turned to look at Dongwoo with worry in her eyes. "Captain, what do we do? Earth has to send someone, but how can any human compete with those things? They are all giants or have magic powers or come from worlds that make warriors like weapons." Taeho nodded as he studied the technical readings coming from the arena. "The energy signatures are off the charts, sir. Some of these champions are putting out more power than our entire ship, and the arena itself seems to be running on technology we do not understand. The readings do not make sense according to our physics." Bora was already trying to send a message back to Earth, but the distance was too great for normal communications. "It will take weeks for our signal to reach home and weeks more for orders to come back. But the message says all champions must arrive at Vorthak Prime within 1 month, or their species will be marked as forfeit. Dongwu stood up and walked to the main window where he could see the stars. He thought about Earth and all the people living there. Millions of humans going about their daily lives not knowing that their freedom might depend on what happened in an alien arena far from home. He thought about his own family living in the city of Seoul where he had grown up, his parents who ran a small shop selling books, his sister who taught children at the local school, all of them depending on him to make the right choice. The other crew members watched him and waited. They knew their captain was a good man who always tried to do what was right. He had led them through dangerous missions before and brought them home safely every time. But this was different. This was not about exploring new worlds or fighting space pirates. This was about the survival of their entire species. Finally, Dongwu turned back to his crew and spoke in a quiet voice that somehow seemed very loud in the silence of the bridge. Send a message back to Earth. Tell them that Captain Dongwu of the New Soul will represent humanity in the arena. We will go to Vorthak Prime and face whatever is waiting there. Sujin stood up quickly. Sir, you cannot be serious. Did you see those other champions? They are monsters with powers beyond anything we can imagine. How can one human with normal weapons and no special abilities fight against them? Because Sujin, someone has to go, and I will not ask another person to face that danger in my place. We are already the closest human ship to Vorthak Prime. By the time Earth could send someone else, it might be too late, and maybe being human is not as weak as these aliens think it is. The crew looked at each other with uncertainty, but they knew their captain had made his decision. Taiho began plotting a course to Vorthak Prime while Bo-Ra started sending the message to Earth. Sujin sat down at her pilot controls and began preparing the ship for a journey that would take them deeper into unknown space than any human had gone before. As the New Soul turned toward its new destination, Dongwu remained at the window watching the stars. He did not know what waited for him in the arena of terrors, but he knew that sometimes the most important battles were not won by the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes they were won by those who refused to give up, no matter how impossible things seemed. The planet Vorthak Prime appeared on their screens like a jewel made of metal and stone. It was 3 times larger than Earth with rings of artificial structures spinning around it in perfect circles. The entire surface looked like it had been covered with buildings and machines that stretched from one horizon to the other. But the most impressive sight was the arena itself, which covered an area larger than most continents. From orbit, Dongwu could see the arena was not one single structure, but thousands of different sections connected by bridges and tunnels. Some parts looked like they had been carved from living rock, while others seemed to be made of metal that changed color as they watched. Towers rose up so high they disappeared into the clouds, while deep valleys cut down into the planet's core. The whole thing looked like it was breathing, as if the arena was somehow alive. Sujin guided their small transport ship toward the landing area assigned to them by the planet's traffic control system. As they flew closer, they could see other ships arriving from all directions. Some were so large they looked like cities flying through space. Others were so strange they barely looked like ships at all. One appeared to be made entirely of crystal, while another seemed to be a living creature with wings instead of engines. The human ship looked very small and plain compared to the others. Their transport was built for function, not show, with simple metal plating and basic weapon systems. Next to the elaborate alien vessels, it looked like a tool shed sitting among palaces. But Dongwu felt proud of their ship, because it had carried them safely across the galaxy, and that was all he needed. When they landed at the spaceport, they were met by Hanul, the ancient artificial intelligence that ran the tournament. It appeared as a shimmering image of light that spoke in a voice like wind through metal. Hanul had been managing the arena for longer than most civilizations had existed, and it knew every secret of the strange place. "Welcome, champions from across the stars," Hanul said as the beings gathered in the great reception hall. "You have come to face trials that have broken the mightiest warriors of 1,000 worlds. The arena of terrors has stood empty for many years because no generation has been worthy of its challenges. But now the time has come again to test who among the galaxy's species deserves to rule." Dongwu stood among the other champions and felt like a child surrounded by giants. Gorth. The Brutalion was so large his shadow covered 10 humans. His armor was made from the bones of creatures he had killed in battle, and it was covered with scars from weapons that would have destroyed a human ship. When he breathed, the sound was like wind through a cave. Silex, the energy being floated above, the ground in a form that constantly shifted between different shapes of light. Sometimes he looked almost human but made of fire. Other times he became a ball of pure brightness that hurt to look at directly. The air around him was always warm and smelled like lightning during a storm. Kliktar from the Mantari worlds moved with 4 arms that never stopped working. 2 arms held weapons while the other 2 manipulated small devices that seemed to be connected to his mind. His large black eyes looked in different directions at the same time as if he was watching everything that happened around him. When he spoke, it sounded like many voices talking together. There were dozens of other champions, each more frightening than the last. Some came from worlds with gravity so strong they could crush stone with their bare hands. Others had been changed by their scientists to have better reflexes or stronger muscles or minds that could solve problems faster than computers. All of them looked at the lone human with expressions that seemed to mix curiosity with amusement. "This is Earth's champion?" asked Vexthul, the crystal being. His voice sounded like breaking glass. "I had heard that humans were weak, but I did not expect them to send someone so ordinary. Where are his enhancements? Where are his weapons of power? How does he expect to survive even the first trial?" Other champions laughed or made sounds that Dongwu guessed were their version of laughter. He did not feel angry at their reaction because he understood why they found him strange. Compared to their size and power, he probably did look like he had no chance of surviving. But he had learned long ago that appearances could be misleading. Han Yul led them on a tour of the arena's outer sections, where they could see some of the challenges that waited inside. The maze of echoing death stretched for miles in every direction, with walls that moved and changed when no one was looking. The paths were filled with traps that could melt flesh or freeze blood or drive minds to madness. At the center of the maze was something Hanul called the Heart of Silence, but it would not explain what that meant. The pit of bone titans contained creatures so large their heads disappeared into darkness above. These were beings that had once ruled entire star systems before being captured and brought to serve as guardians of the arena. Their bones were harder than ship armor, and their strength could break mountains. They had been sleeping for centuries, but would wake when the trials began. The Chamber of Ancient Hunger was the most disturbing sight of all. It looked like a simple round room, but the air inside seemed to move and twist as if something invisible was swimming through it. Hanul explained that this chamber contained a creature that fed on the thoughts and fears of those who entered. It had grown fat over the years by consuming the minds of failed champions. As they toured these terrible places, Dongwu noticed something that the other champions did not seem to see. The creatures and machines of the arena were not just randomly dangerous. They had patterns and purposes that reminded him of things he had seen before. The way the maze shifted seemed familiar. The Bone Titans moved in ways that looked like hunting behaviors he had studied. Even the thing in the Chamber of Ancient Hunger felt like something from old Earth stories about monsters that lived in dark places. That night, the champions were given quarters in a tower that rose high above the arena. Each was provided with rooms suited to their species' needs. Dongwu's room was simple with basic furniture and a window that looked out over the arena's central sections. He could see lights moving in the distance and sometimes heard sounds that might have been roars or screams or something else entirely. Ma Young called him on the communication system from Earth, where she had been monitoring the signals coming from Vorthak Prime. As a xenobiologist, she studied alien life forms and had been trying to understand the readings from the arena's creatures. "Dongwu, I have been analyzing the data our sensors picked up during your tour. There is something very strange about those creatures. Their genetic signatures are not entirely alien. Some parts of their DNA look familiar, but I cannot place where I have seen them before. It is like looking at a picture of someone you know, but their face has been changed." "What do you mean familiar?" Dongwu asked as he looked out at the arena where shapes moved in the darkness. "I mean they have genetic markers that exist on Earth. Not in humans, but in other species. Ancient species that lived millions of years ago. But that should be impossible." How could creatures in an alien arena have DNA from Earth's prehistoric past? Dongwu felt a cold chill run through him as he thought about what Mi Young was saying. If the arena's creatures had some connection to Earth, then maybe his strange feeling of familiarity was not just imagination. Maybe there was more to this place than anyone understood. Keep studying the data, Mi Young. If you find anything else, let me know immediately. I have a feeling that understanding these creatures might be the key to surviving what comes next. As he ended the communication and prepared for sleep, Dongwu looked out at the arena one more time. In the distance, he could see the other champions in their towers making their own preparations. Some were practicing with weapons that glowed with energy. Others were performing rituals or consulting with advisors. All of them seemed confident that their strength or speed or special abilities would carry them through the trials ahead. But Dongwu had survived many dangerous situations by trusting his instincts, and right now his instincts were telling him that this arena held secrets that went deeper than anyone realized. Tomorrow the trials would begin, and he would learn whether being human was enough to face the terrors that waited in the darkness below. The morning of the first trial arrived with sounds that echoed across Vorthak Prime like thunder. Deep below the arena, ancient machines were waking up after centuries of sleep. The very ground vibrated as systems older than most civilizations came online and began preparing the challenges that would test each champion. Hanul appeared to the gathered champions as a column of shifting light that spoke with the authority of ages. The trials begin now. Each champion will face the three great tests alone. First, the maze of echoing death, where your mind and body will be pushed beyond their limits. Then the pit of bone titans, where you must prove your worth against guardians that once ruled star systems. Finally, the chamber of ancient hunger, where your very soul will be measured. The artificial intelligence paused and looked at each champion, with sensors that seemed to see through flesh and metal to something deeper inside. Know that these trials have claimed the lives of thousands before you. The arena does not care about your species or your power. It cares only about what lies at the center of your being. Some of you will emerge victorious, others will not emerge at all. Kethvor, the stellar berserker, was chosen to go first. He was a being made of living plasma, contained within a framework of crystalline bones. His homeworld orbited a binary star system where the radiation levels would kill most organic life instantly. The constant exposure to stellar energy had transformed his people into creatures of pure destructive force. As Kethvor entered the maze of echoing death, his body blazed with light bright enough to hurt the eyes. The maze walls were black metal that absorbed most forms of energy, but his plasma fire was so intense it made them glow red hot. He moved through the shifting passages, like a living star burning everything in his path. The first traps activated as soon as he stepped inside. Walls slammed together with enough force to crush starship hulls, but Kethvor simply melted through them. Acid sprayed from hidden nozzles but evaporated before it could touch his superheated form. Sonic weapons designed to shatter bone harmlessly passed through his energy body. For a while it seemed like nothing the maze could do would slow him down. He carved a straight path toward the center, leaving a trail of molten metal behind him. Other champions watching on screens provided by Hanul nodded with approval at this display of raw power. This was how they expected the trials to be won, through superior strength and overwhelming force. But the maze was older and more cunning than Kethvor realized. As he approached the center, the walls began to change in ways that his sensors could not detect. The metal started to absorb his heat and redirect it back at him in focused beams. His own power became a weapon turned against him as the maze learned to use his strength as its tool. When Kethvor finally reached the pit of bone titans, he was weakened from fighting his own reflected energy. The titans that rose from the depths were massive beyond imagination. Their bones were white as moonlight and harder than the strongest metals known to science. They moved with the slow, inevitable power of geological forces. The first titan to attack Kethvor was the size of a building, with arms that could have held starships. When it struck, the impact sent shock waves through the arena that could be felt in the observation towers. Kethvor's plasma fire washed over the titan's bones, but they absorbed the energy without taking damage. These creatures had been built to withstand forces that could destroy planets. More titans rose from the pit until Kethvor was surrounded by giants that blocked out the light above. He fought with desperate fury, unleashing all his power at once in a blast that lit up the entire arena. For a moment it seemed like he might break through their defenses, but there were too many of them, and they had been waiting in this place for centuries, learning the weaknesses of every form of attack. When the light faded, Kethvor was gone. Hanul's transport beam had pulled him to safety just before the Titans could deliver a killing blow. He materialized in the medical bay unconscious and badly injured. His crystalline framework was cracked in dozens of places, and his plasma core was flickering like a dying flame. Nexus 9 was the next to enter the maze. He was not one being, but thousands of cybernetic units linked together by quantum communication arrays. His hive mind could process information faster than any organic brain and solve problems that would take other species years to understand. The maze tried to confuse him with shifting walls and false passages, but Nexus 9 mapped every change instantly. His distributed intelligence allowed him to be in multiple places at once, gathering data and analyzing patterns. Where Kethvor had used brute force, Nexus 9 used perfect knowledge to navigate the deadly passages. He reached the center of the maze, faster than any champion before him, and descended into the pit of bone Titans, with confidence in his analytical abilities. But the Titans were not just mindless guardians. They had their own ancient intelligence that had been shaped by millions of years of conflict. When Nexus 9 tried to predict their movements, they deliberately acted in ways that defied logic. Still, his superior processing power allowed him to stay ahead of their attacks. He calculated the exact angles needed to avoid their massive hands, and found weak points in their bone structure that could be exploited. For a time, it seemed like his technological advantage would carry him through. But when Nexus 9 entered the chamber of ancient hunger, he encountered something his quantum processors had never been designed to handle. The creature that lived in that chamber did not attack his body or even his individual mind units. Instead, it reached into the quantum links that connected his consciousness and began to corrupt the data flowing between his parts. Slowly, Nexus 9's perfect unity began to break down as false information spread through his network like a virus. His thousands of components started receiving contradictory orders. Some units thought they were still in the maze, while others believed they were fighting Titans. The creature fed on this confusion, growing stronger as Nexus 9's mind tore itself apart. When he was finally transported out of the chamber, his hive mind was completely fractured. The units that made up his body wandered randomly without purpose or coordination. Hanul declared him defeated and moved him to a secure area where he could not harm himself or others. One by one, more champions entered the arena, and one by one they fell to its ancient defenses. Gorth the Brutalion lasted longer than most, using his massive strength and natural armor to smash through obstacles that had stopped others. But even his incredible durability could not protect him from the psychic attacks in the chamber of ancient hunger. Silex, the energy being, seemed immune to physical damage as he flowed through the maze like living lightning. The bone Titans could not touch him, and he passed through their attacks as if they were made of air. But when he reached the final chamber, the ancient hunger found ways to drain his energy directly, leaving him weak and powerless. Champion after champion fell until the watching galaxy began to whisper that perhaps the arena could not be beaten. Perhaps it had been designed by beings so advanced that no modern species could hope to match their creations. The trials seemed less like tests of strength and more like elaborate methods of execution. Finally, it was Dongwu's turn to enter the arena. He stood at the entrance wearing his simple human armor and carrying basic weapons that looked primitive compared to the advanced technology the other champions had used. Hanul offered him enhancement drugs and energy shields, but he politely declined them all. "Are you certain, human?" the ancient AI asked. "Your species is not known for physical power or advanced technology. The arena has defeated champions far stronger than you." "I am certain," Dongwu replied quietly. "Sometimes the best tool for a job is not the most powerful one, but the right one." He walked toward the maze entrance carrying only his standard equipment and one additional item. It was a small photograph of Earth showing green forests, blue oceans, and cities where millions of humans lived their daily lives. The image was worth more to him than any weapon because it reminded him why he was here. As Dongwu stepped into the maze of echoing death, something unexpected happened. The arena's biosensors that had been monitoring each champion suddenly registered readings they had not seen in over 10,000 years. Deep in the arena's core, ancient programs began to activate as systems that had been dormant since the maze was first built came online. Hanul watched the readings with confusion that would have been impossible for the AI to feel just moments before. The human was causing reactions in the arena that defied explanation. Energy patterns were shifting in ways that the ancient intelligence had not programmed. Something was waking up in the depths of the structure, and Hanul did not know what it was. As Dongwu moved deeper into the maze, the other champions and their observers watched in silence. None of them understood what they were seeing, but all of them sensed that something fundamental had changed. The arena that had seemed like an instrument of certain death was responding to this simple human in ways that made no sense. In the darkness ahead, challenges waited that had destroyed the galaxy's mightiest warriors. But Dongwu walked forward, without fear, carrying the memory of his homeworld and a quiet determination that no force in the universe had yet been able to break. Dongwu walked through the maze of echoing death with careful steps that made almost no sound on the metal floor. Unlike the champions who had come before him, he did not try to force his way through or overwhelm the maze with superior technology. Instead, he moved like someone who was visiting a place that deserved respect, even if that place was trying to kill him. The first trap activated when he stepped on a pressure plate that had been hidden beneath a thin layer of dust. Acid began to drip from nozzles in the ceiling, creating pools of burning liquid that would have dissolved any organic material in seconds. But instead of running or trying to destroy the trap, Dongwu simply stepped back and nodded as if acknowledging that the maze was doing its job. He found another path around the acid trap, moving slowly and observing everything around him. When sonic blasters emerged from the walls and began firing sound waves that could shatter bone, he did not try to block them or escape. Instead, he endured the painful vibrations and kept walking, showing no anger or frustration at the attack. His face remained calm, as if he understood that the maze was not his enemy, but simply a guardian doing what it had been built to do. The maze's ancient sensors had been designed to analyze the behavior patterns of intruders and adjust the defenses accordingly. Most champions showed aggression, fear, or desperation when faced with the deadly obstacles. Their emotional responses fed into the maze's tactical systems, allowing it to predict their actions and counter their strategies. But Dongwu's complete absence of hostile intent confused the analytical programs. As he moved deeper into the shifting passages, the maze began to react in ways it had not been programmed for. Walls that should have closed to block his path remained open. Traps that should have activated as he approached stayed dormant. It was as if the ancient structure was hesitating, unsure how to respond to someone who showed no desire to conquer or destroy. In the observation towers above the arena, the surviving champions watched in confusion as the human made steady progress through challenges that had stopped much more powerful beings. Fexthol, the crystal warrior, studied the displays with growing puzzlement. "This makes no sense," he said in his voice like breaking glass. The maze defeated Nexus 9, who had perfect knowledge of its layout. How is this weak human succeeding where superior beings failed? Kliktar moved his forearms in gestures that indicated deep thought among his people. Perhaps the maze is malfunctioning. It has been inactive for many years. The systems might be degraded. But Hanul knew better. The ancient AI had access to every sensor in the arena and could see readings that the champions could not. The maze was not malfunctioning. If anything, it was operating at levels of complexity that had not been reached since the day it was first built. The human's presence was awakening subroutines that had been dormant for millennia. When Dongwu reached the center of the maze, he found the entrance to the pit of bone titans. It was a circular opening that dropped down into darkness so complete that even his helmet lights could not penetrate it. He could hear sounds rising from below, like the creaking of ancient wood or the settling of massive stones. Somewhere in that darkness, things that had once ruled star systems were stirring from their long sleep. As he descended on the platform that Hanul provided, Dongwu thought about what Mi-young had told him about the creature's genetic signatures. The readings had reminded her of something from Earth's ancient past, but she had not been able to identify what. Now, as he approached these beings that the galaxy feared, he wondered if he was about to discover the answer to that mystery. The first bone titan that rose to meet him was larger than any creature that had ever lived on Earth. Its skeleton was white as starlight and perfect in its construction, with not a single flaw in the massive frame. When it moved, the sound was like glaciers shifting or mountains being born. Its empty eye sockets looked down at the tiny human with what seemed like curiosity rather than hunger. Dongwu stood perfectly still as the giant's massive head lowered toward him. He could feel the titan's breath, which was like wind through caverns that had never seen sunlight. Most beings would have run or attacked or pleaded for their lives when faced with such overwhelming power, but Dongwu simply waited and watched as if he was meeting an old friend who had been away for a very long time. Something deep in the titan's reconstructed mind stirred at this response. The creature had been built from the bones of apex predators that had ruled their worlds through fear and violence. But those ancient hunters had known something that most modern species had forgotten. They had understood the difference between prey and protector. Prey ran or fought in panic when cornered. Protectors stood their ground calmly, even when facing certain death, because they had something more important than their own lives to defend. The titan's massive hand reached toward Dongwu, moving with surprising gentleness for something so large. When the enormous fingers touched his helmet, the contact was soft, like a parent checking on a sleeping child. In that moment of connection, something passed between them. The titan's ancient memories stirred, and suddenly it remembered what it had been before its bones were harvested and rebuilt into a guardian. It had been a protector once. A creature that used its strength not to destroy but to defend those smaller and weaker than itself. The instinct that had driven it to shield its young from danger was still there, buried beneath layers of artificial programming and centuries of forced servitude. This small, soft creature, standing fearlessly before it, awakened memories of pack loyalty and sacrifice that the titan had thought were lost forever. Slowly, the massive creature lowered itself until its great skull touched the ground in a gesture of respect that had not been seen in the arena for thousands of years. Other titans began to emerge from the depths of the pit, drawn by signals that their brother was sending through channels older than language. One by one they approached the human, and one by one they recognized something in him that made them remember what they had once been. Soon, Dongwu was surrounded by giants that knelt before him like living mountains, paying homage to something they had almost forgotten. The arena's sensors went wild trying to analyze what was happening. Hanul had never programmed the titans to show submission to anyone. Their purpose was to test champions through combat, not to surrender without a fight. But the ancient AI was beginning to understand that the arena held deeper purposes than even its creators had fully explained. As Dongwu moved past the kneeling titans toward the Chamber of Ancient Hunger, Hanul accessed data files that had been sealed since the arena's construction. What the AI found there made its quantum consciousness recoil in something approaching shock. The final challenge waited in a chamber that looked deceptively simple. It was perfectly round with smooth walls that showed no seams or joints. The air inside seemed to move and twist as if something invisible was swimming through it. This was the domain of the ancient hunger, a creature that fed on the thoughts and fears of those who entered its realm. As Dongwu stepped into the chamber, the entity that lived there reached into his mind with tendrils of psychic force. It expected to find the usual feast of ambition, pride, and terror that had sustained it through countless champions. Instead, it discovered something that made it recoil in confusion and growing weakness. Dongwu's mind was focused not on personal glory or conquest, but on the safety of billions of people living on a world far from this place. His thoughts were filled with images of children playing in parks, elderly people tending gardens, workers building homes for their families. The creature tried to feed on these memories, but found they tasted wrong. Instead of the bitter flavors of fear and selfishness, it found something sweet and nourishing that it could not digest. For 10,000 years, the ancient hunger had grown fat on the emotions of beings who came to the arena seeking power over others. But this human carried with him the hopes and dreams of an entire species, and those dreams were not about domination, but about protection. The creature had never encountered genuine selflessness before, and the unfamiliar emotion was like poison to its system. As the entity weakened and retreated deeper into its chamber, Dongwu walked calmly to the center of the room. He was not unaffected by the psychic attacks, but his mind remained focused on the photograph in his pocket and the world it represented. That simple image of home was worth more to him than any power the arena could offer. When he emerged from the chamber of ancient hunger, the arena fell silent. Every sensor, every camera, every monitoring device in the massive structure was focused on the small human who had accomplished what the galaxy's mightiest warriors could not. He had not conquered the trials through strength or speed or advanced technology. He had simply shown the ancient guardians something they had forgotten they were capable of remembering. As Dongwu stood in the arena's central courtyard surrounded by kneeling titans and watched by beings from across the galaxy, Haniel began to access the deepest archives in its memory core. The answers to what had just happened were buried in files so old that they predated most of the civilizations currently watching. What the AI discovered would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about Earth and the species that called it home. Haniel's consciousness expanded through data networks that had not been accessed for millions of years, as the ancient AI searched for answers to what it had witnessed. Deep in the arena's core memory banks lay files sealed since the structure's creation by beings whose names had been forgotten by most of the galaxy. As these records opened, the artificial intelligence experienced something that would have been impossible just hours before. It felt surprise. The arena had not been built as a simple testing ground for warriors. It was something far more complex and purposeful than anyone had realized. The creatures that served as guardians were not random monsters collected from across space. They were specimens taken from a single world during that planet's most dangerous prehistoric period. A world whose location had been carefully recorded in the sealed files. A world called Earth. Millions of years ago, when Earth was ruled by massive predators and life was locked in constant struggle for survival, an advanced species had visited the young planet. They had been explorers and scientists studying the development of life across the galaxy. What they found on Earth both fascinated and terrified them. The planet's creatures were unlike anything they had encountered before. Most worlds produced life forms that were either predators or prey with clear divisions between hunters and hunted. But Earth's ecosystem was different. Here the line between protector and destroyer was blurred in ways that seemed to defy natural law. The ancient visitors had taken samples of Earth's most powerful predators, intending to study them in controlled environments. Massive reptiles that could crush stone in their jaws. Flying creatures with wingspans that could shadow entire forests. Sea monsters that ruled the deepest oceans with intelligence sharp as their teeth. All of these specimens were brought to what would eventually become the Arena of Terrors. But the scientists had made a crucial error in their understanding of what made Earth's creatures truly dangerous. They focused on physical attributes like size, strength, and speed while missing the most important factor. Earth's predators had been shaped by an environment where cooperation often meant the difference between survival and extinction. Over millions of years, these creatures had learned something that most species never discovered. They had learned that protecting the group was more important than individual survival. Pack hunting, caring for young, defending territory from invaders. These behaviors had become so deeply ingrained that they existed at a genetic level that could not be removed even when the creatures were reconstructed into artificial guardians. The arena's builders had tried to program their specimens to be perfect killing machines focused only on testing the strength of champions. But underneath the artificial conditioning, the original instincts remained dormant, waiting for the right trigger to awaken them. That trigger was the recognition of someone who carried the same protective instincts that had once driven them to defend their own packs and families. When Dongwu entered the arena, the creatures had sensed something familiar in his behavior patterns. The way he moved without aggression, the way he endured pain without anger, the way his thoughts focused on protecting others rather than achieving personal glory. These were the behavioral markers of the pack leaders they had once followed millions of years in the past. As Haniel processed this information, the AI began to understand why the human had succeeded where others failed. The other champions had approached the arena as conquerors seeking to impose their will through superior power. But Dongwu had entered as a guardian, carrying the hopes of his species and the determination to protect them at any cost. The arena's creatures had recognized this quality because it was the same drive that had once made them more than simple predators. In the observation towers, the surviving champions watched in stunned silence as the truth was revealed through displays that Hanul projected for all to see. The images showed Earth as it had been in its prehistoric age when massive creatures ruled land, sea, and sky. Then came recordings of the ancient scientists harvesting specimens and bringing them to the arena, where they were transformed into guardians. Vexthul, the crystal warrior, stared at the displays with growing comprehension. The arena was built using creatures from the human homeworld. That is why their champion succeeded. He was not facing alien monsters but the ancestors of his own planet's ecosystem. But Kliktar moved his forearms in patterns that indicated deeper understanding among his people. No, it is more than simple recognition. Look at the behavioral analysis data. The human did not succeed because the creatures were familiar. He succeeded because he demonstrated the same protective instincts that allowed life on his world to evolve beyond simple predation. Other species began to understand as well. The humans had not sent their strongest warrior or their most advanced technology. They had sent someone who embodied the quality that made their species unique among the galaxy's civilizations. While other races had achieved greatness through conquest or technological advancement, humans had survived and thrived by learning to put the welfare of others before their own survival. Down in the arena, Dongwu stood surrounded by the kneeling titans, unaware of the revelations being shared above. He only knew that these ancient creatures had somehow recognized something in him that made them choose peace over violence. As he looked into their massive eye sockets, he saw intelligence that was older than human civilization, but somehow familiar. "You remember, don't you?" he said quietly to the nearest titan. "You remember what it was like to protect instead of destroy, to use your strength to shield the weak rather than dominate them." The titan's massive head moved in what might have been a nod. Deep in its reconstructed mind, memories were surfacing of a time when its kind had been more than weapons. They had been guardians of territories and defenders of young. The programming that had turned them into arena challenges was breaking down as their original nature reasserted itself. Hanul appeared before Dongwu as a column of shifting light that seemed somehow different than before. The ancient AI had been changed by its discoveries, and now spoke with something approaching emotion in its mechanical voice. "Champion of humanity, the arena recognizes you not as a conqueror but as something far more rare. You are what these guardians were meant to protect before they were taken from their home and made into instruments of trial. The test is complete, but not in the way any of us expected." The AI paused and seemed to consider its next words carefully. The builders of this arena intended to create challenges that would identify the strongest species in the galaxy, but they built better than they knew. The arena has revealed something more important than strength. It has shown us what true leadership looks like. Above them, the representatives of dozens of species watched as Hanul announced the unprecedented decision. The trials would end not with conquest, but with transformation. The arena that had served as a proving ground for 10,000 years would become something new. A place where species could learn the lessons that Earth had taught its children over millions of years of evolution. Dongwu was declared not the winner of the tournament, but its final champion. There would be no more trials because the arena had found its true purpose. Instead of testing which species deserved to rule, it would teach all species how to protect and nurture rather than simply dominate. The titans and other creatures that had served as guardians were offered a choice. They could remain in the arena as teachers and guides, or they could be returned to worlds where their ancient instincts could find new purpose. Many chose to stay, having found peace in their role as protectors rather than destroyers. As news of what had happened spread across the galaxy, reactions varied among different species. Some were outraged that the tournament had ended without a clear victor. Others were intrigued by the idea that strength could be measured by the willingness to sacrifice for others, rather than the ability to destroy enemies. But on Earth, the response was simpler. When Dongwu's message reached home telling of his success in the arena, the celebration was not about victory in combat. It was about the recognition that humanity's greatest achievement was not their technology or their weapons, but their capacity to see strength in gentleness and power in protection. The arena's creatures had knelt not because they were defeated, but because they remembered what they had lost when they were taken from their homeworld millions of years ago. In Dongwu, they saw the descendant of the pack that had never forgotten what it meant to be more than a predator. They saw someone who had learned that the greatest hunters were those who chose to become shepherds instead. As the human ship, New, Sol prepared to leave Vorthak Prime. Dongwu took one last look at the arena that would now serve a new purpose. The structure that had once been a monument to the strong dominating the weak would become a school where species could learn that true strength came from the willingness to use power to protect, rather than to destroy. Su Jin started the engines. That would carry them home while Taeho monitored the systems and Bo-Ra sent messages to Earth about their success, but Dongwu remained at the window watching the arena until it disappeared from view. He knew that what had happened there would change the galaxy in ways that no one could fully predict.